Yeah.
Cool. I put in headphones, kind of quiet now.
That's bad. Yeah, you're good now. Did you guys hear the story about sandwiches?
No.
I was on a call with some big companies that I won't name and this morning, and as the guy was about to open his mouth and say something really, really important, he's like, I think the important thing to remember is, and you just hear a kid go, sandwiches. And then he like tries to repeat himself again, and the kid is like, make me sandwiches. And the guy just would not give up. The kid would not give up until he responded. That's our new lives now.
That's awesome.
So we're live, guys. Welcome everybody. Welcome to Creator Exchange from the Outpost and Be My Eyes. And thanks to all of our partners, all the folks who have helped us make this happen. Do Stuff Media, B&H, and please click on the links on the Outpost site for Oxfam. We're supporting Oxfam in all of the COVID-19 relief efforts. And thanks for joining us again for another week. We're here every Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time. I'm joined today by two amazing artists, Scott Hansen from Tycho, and Chris Burkard, the photographer extraordinaire. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're super pleased to welcome two different artists like to our little home at home every week. Personally, for me, my name's Will Butler. I'm the VP of Community at Be My Eyes, which is a mobile app that allows people with good eyesight to lend it on demand to people who need it. So our whole motto is see the world together. So bringing two different people together with two different points of view to share insights into creativity and how they work and how they are effective is right up our alley. But just to start off, you guys are both native Californians, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Yeah, born and raised in Central California and decided to call this home. And it's hard to move away from the beach once you, I think once you grow up here, so.
Where'd you grow up in the valley?
I grew up in Pismo Beach, California. So I'm just, I kind of grew up like near the ocean and then just, stuck around. I think started to travel early on, but it was like, I couldn't really find an excuse to leave the ocean behind. So
yeah, that's a good place to stay put. I thought you were from inland. I'm from Sacramento.
Oh, nice.
So
nice.
I made my way out to the beach. Took about 18 years.
Nice. What was that first experience? Did you go like as a kid? Like would you cruise over to the coast and like Mendocino and stuff, or like was it always SF or
almost always San Francisco? I think we'd go to Monterey. I was actually born in Monterey because we lived there very briefly in Salinas. But we'd go out there a little bit, but mostly San Francisco. Those are my memories. My dad was a big football fan, so we'd go watch the 49ers at Candlestick. So I always remember driving out there, and I just was always. I had never really been to the city though, like inside of San Francisco until I decided to go to college there. So I came out here when I was 18.
No way. So you've been there ever since. That's been it.
No. I went back home for about 10 years, and then I've been here this time about 16 years.
Nice.
So yeah, I was only here for a few years the first time.
Was it? I mean, that's a crazy change. I mean, I know Sacramento is like it's not a big city, but it's not a small city by any means. But like migrating to SF is quite a change. What was the draw for you?
The first time it was just like the culture of it and music. I think like just trying to find like a live music scene or I don't know. I don't know what it was. Just basically it was an interesting place geographically as well, and it just seemed like the place you went because Sacramento at that time downtown wasn't anywhere near what it is now. So like I came out for that, but then the second time I came out for work actually to do graphic design stuff.
Right.
And then that lasted like 6 months, and but then I just stayed put, so it was good.
Yeah, I really want, I mean, maybe not now, but I really want to get into that sort of background about graphic design. And, I really want to know about this classic moniker ISO 50 and sort of how that came about. And, for I guess for those who don't know the other sort of name that, at one point you're known by and whatnot, how kind of, photography and design has, like, I guess, in some way altered your perspective or changed the way that you've looked at the world or viewed making music and whatnot, because it seems like it's really intertwined, and I'm not going to assume to know that, like, to know who makes the decisions for what creative outputs you put out in the world. But it seems to me like you have your hands in it all, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd love to kind of dive into that at some point. So
Scott, can you give us a little bit of a kind of crash course in the evolution of the Tycho, I'd say brand, but you know what I mean? Just like the artist and the graphic design, because I think I probably bought an ISO 50 print when I was like 12 years old or something like that. like almost 20 years ago now, I feel.
Yeah. That's actually about right when I started doing posters and selling posters and shirts online. But yeah, the original, I think the original connection was just in the mid 90s. I was like really into drum and bass and electronic music, and the graphic design scene around that. I didn't know what graphic design was, but I think that was the first time I became exposed to something and gravitated towards it. Right. I just, before then I had like rock posters of like Led Zeppelin. It's just a picture with like a logo or whatever. Yeah. And then I was like, whoa, like there's no picture of an artist. This is just like graphics, like Ronnie Size and Goldie and all that stuff. So that's what got me kind of like tuned into that. And then, but they both came out of the same thing. I started making fake, like I would make like album covers for my own like mini disc rips. I do like mini disc rips. Yeah. And then I make like a different alternate album cover. And then I started making like fake album covers for music that I hadn't made yet. But because I didn't get into music till I was like 20. So anyways, they just grew out of each other in that way. And like, I was just always like trying to make music so I could put graphics on it and vice versa. And then I got the ISO 50 is photography. I got into photography like maybe like 4 years later. And Arnaud Mercier, do you remember him?
Yeah, name sounds familiar. Yeah.
He passed away a few years ago, but he was kind of like my mentor in photography, and he turned me on to Fuji Velvia ISO 50. Yeah. So like I use that as like my name for visual stuff.
Yeah, and that was sort of like where the question came from, because ISO 50 is usually like a nod to like maybe medium format, large format, or like landscape photography in general, because a lot of times people are shooting with like Provia 400 or something like that, and they're trying to shoot for more like skin tones. But if you're shooting ISO 50, like you're trying to capture like something on slide film, something super vivid. Like at least that was the impetus of my career, was like Ektachrome, Velvia 50, like saving those rolls of film for like the best morning light, the best evening light. Like they were like gold canisters,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was interesting. I like the nod to kind of like that history of photography. And then photographer and designer first, musician second. When or was it always the same? Like
it was it was in parallel, but I definitely made my living off of design for the first 10 years or so.
Wow. And what point was that like jump made, or was there any like transition, or was it just seamless? Like, was it like, okay, this is the right time to like swap over sort of thing?
Yeah, I think I just kept getting more client work and started selling the posters. Actually, you know what? That's it. It's when I made the shop and started selling prints and shirts. And it was kind of like, well, why don't I just focus on this? Because before you're relying on a steady stream of client work, and then so I didn't want to like count on that. But then once I was able to kind of generate the income myself, that's when I was able to make the leap.
That's right.
How about you? Were you working in photography somewhere else, and then you kind of went off on your own?
No, it was like I was going to junior college and I was working some dead end job at 19, and I told myself that I'm going to quit both of them and pursue photography. And I think there was a very realistic chance that I was going to be like face down in the dirt somewhere, not at all like surviving. But I just told myself, I've always seen this, I've always seen opportunity as this like analogy where you're at the train station and your bags are like halfway packed and the train's about to leave and you have to get on it, or opportunity is going to leave and you're not going to be ready. Like no matter what, you're not going to be ready. And so I think that I just jumped on it, and I knew that there was going to be some years like of struggle, and I was going to be shooting jobs and doing assignments that weren't really ideal. But I think in the back of my mind, there was always the goal that I would push this into something that was like inspiring and motivating. And coming from a small town, I grew up, again, it's like a tiny little area. I didn't have a passport, never traveled anywhere. Like for me, the biggest trips I ever did as a kid were like national parks. So I think a camera became this, like maybe this tool to be like, wow, maybe I could leave this town and see the world. And that was like always in the back of my mind. So yeah, it took a while. But
was this before, would you say this is before social media was like a way to get into that, or like?
This is about 15 years ago. I started my career again, kind of shooting surfing and working for surf magazines. I was on staff for Surfer Magazine and Trans World and Surfline for about 8 years, and then was just shooting a steady stream of editorial work. And that was it. It was all editorial. And I remember being in Iceland back in 2006 or 5. And a friend of mine, a surfer, is like, yeah, you should really check out social media. It's this great tool. And I was like, dude, there's no way my editors would ever let me share something before an article comes out. And I think, like yourself or any creative person, there's an element of what we put out there that's filtered via agents or PR or magazines or whatever. So everything I was doing, like I was having these mind-blowing trips going to Russia and getting thrown in some jail cell or like, just crazy stuff. And then I would get the article of the magazine and only like 10 pages would come out. And there was thousands of images and stories that weren't being told. And so that's really what social media and self-publishing and making books and films became about for me, was like the transition of telling my own stories. And I think it's such a powerful medium for that, if you have more to say on certain subjects. So
yeah, definitely like the feel. I like the kind of immediacy of it, where it feels like a stream of consciousness as opposed to, this kind of like, I got to put together a book or like a website or a collection or a portfolio, where it feels like this giant thing that everybody needs to consume as a whole. But like, it's nice to just piecemeal have the things go out.
Right. And coming from a design background, I'm sure it's like, there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of sometimes input and you want it to be perfect. And there's something about the imperfection of putting something out there that's really nice in this day and age, and not allowing it to be so precious in some way,
Definitely. Although I've realized once they came out with Instagram stories, because Instagram being visually oriented, that kind of feels like my, that's the most natural platform for visual work. But when they came out with stories, I got like super precious about actual posts. Those took on all this importance. And I'm like, each, now I think of that grid as like a portfolio, and then the stories are the ones that are kind of in the moment.
I totally agree. What's so funny is that I tell people all the time, I'm like, hey, there's not a single creative director, art director, musician, in the world that's above using social media. Like if somebody wants to get an immediate representation of who you are, they're probably going to go there because all you need is your thumb. And it's so simple. Like we're creatures of habit, right? We're going to do what's easy. And so I do think that like you look at that grid and it gives an interpretation of what that person cares about or what that person values maybe. And although that might seem shallow at times, it is a pretty real representation of where we want to spend our time or where we want to be or whatever. But I do love the fact that stories just kind of disappear and it can just be like a snippet into our daily life and whatnot.
Yeah. So, did you ever have a web-based portfolio, or do you still have one?
Yeah, I still do. I mean, I still do for like clients and just showing like my reel and my director reel and stuff like that. And it's funny because like it's important, but it also feels kind of archaic, but I know that like it still gets used. It's more of like the second, as opposed to people going there first and then finding you on social media. Yeah. It's like, that's the secondary phase. Like, they like your work and then they want to hire you. So they're going to look deeper at what myself or my studio has done for commercial work. And it's like a necessary evil. I kind of wish that it could all just be this like more blog format, more stream of consciousness, more immediate. connectivity, but yeah.
Yeah, I miss that. I let mine slip for, I don't know, the better part of a decade, probably. I don't think I've updated it. And actually over that, I haven't posted anything there. I need it. But, you know, like, that's what I miss, is like designing the actual way it's presented, and not being forced into this kind of like, however they designed the app, you know, whatever platform you're on. So yeah, I want to get back to that eventually. Cause like when I go to a well-designed portfolio now, I'm like, whoa, like, it's like almost like it's come full circle for me now. I'm like, now I'm like craving that like personal touch to the whole thing. Yeah, although everything's like Squarespace now.
Discovering your site, like as a young person, and like, it was its own little world. I think it had that tree design, right?
Yeah, that was what was low, but it was supposed to feel like, like a device, like you were using some machine.
That's so
right. I want to ask you guys, you know,
not usable.
Yeah, well, it's like over the last two, we've now spent the last 2 months at home, right?
Right.
And maybe this isn't. Correct me if I'm wrong here on this, but like, Scott, I imagine that you are sort of have an inward creativity that would allow you to stay at home and just work and work and work. Chris, I imagine you're more outward. You're outward bound all the time. Starting with you, Scott, what have the last 2 months been like for you creatively?
I mean, yeah, I think you nailed it. My life has not changed at all, other than I'm pretty much a homebody, and I like to be in the studio as much as possible. And, you know, it's punctuated by, you know, like a year of touring, but we were really fortunate in that we got most of the big tours on this cycle. Basically, there's like you call it a cycle. You put out a record, you tour it, and then you start over from scratch. So like, we pretty much got through most of the touring section. So if anything, it just ended up shutting down the cycle earlier. So it was a bummer, because we did have to cancel or postpone some shows. But as far from a creative standpoint, there's parts of it that I enjoy, just because it's like, now I just get to completely focus on what's next, instead of having to kind of put it off for, you know, because usually by the time a cycle's over, you're like super like amped to work on music again, because it's been so long.
What about you, Chris? What's it been like the last 2 months?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting for sure. You know, just it's been obviously a big eye opener, because I remember the day of the travel ban, I was supposed to leave at 4 a.m. and go to Iceland to do a big project, and you know, had to, you know, obviously cancel flights, and since then, that was March 12th. It was actually my birthday, so I like remember it very vividly. Like I went out to dinner that night with my family, like pretty much like nothing, whatever was happening, and then it was like travel ban, boom. I didn't know if I'd be able to get home or I'd be in quarantine. So I canceled my trip, and yeah, last couple of months I've just been at home. Like, luckily I have my studio here with my staff, and we get to work on lots of little projects here and there that keep us busy. But it's been a real eye opener, you know, it's been a real eye opener in terms of, I think a modern day photographer, how you recession proof your business, and just like how you pivot to tell stories in a different way, and the work that you do for brands and how that really evolved. So I've been, you know, spending a ton of time with my kids, which I cannot express, you know, the gratitude more. And just, I'm still getting outside, you know, I'm still able to go like surf and ride my bike. And I think I've never been more appreciative of living in a slightly isolated community where like those things are still allowed, I guess you could say. So I'm trying to take full advantage of that, like getting sunlight and being outdoors. Cause it definitely, like, I mean, it affects the mood for me, like being at my house for a week straight, not going to the grocery store, not seeing other people, you know. And what's funny is I just miss the simple things. I miss like sitting down and having someone serve you a meal. And like, you know, that's something that like we kind of take for granted, or going to the movies, you know? So yeah, it's been wild.
Scott, any tips for Chris on how to stay home and not go anywhere for a week?
Turn into an introvert, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, like it suits me, but yeah, I mean, talking about like, it has been a real wake up call, because you get into this rhythm and you just assume, you take a lot of things for granted, like the ability to tour, which is a huge part of any musician's income. And it just makes you realize like, whoa, you got to like stay nimble, or you got to be thinking about like you can't count on any element of this thing, and you have to be ready to kind of to switch to something else if this something crazy like this happens. I mean, from what they're saying, it seems like, I don't know how, they're just saying this is going to keep happening potentially. So that's kind of scary.
Yeah. And it's so funny, for me, at least, I talk to so many people in my own industry, photographers and this and that. And we all kind of have the same concerns. Right. And, but I mean, obviously we were talking before the podcast, sports and music is one of those industries that's heavily affected, obviously, with the transition of, the last 10 years, how much touring has become a part of your income and whatnot, and the modern musician's income. So it's so interesting to me to consider that nimbleness and how that might transition. I would just love to know, is there thoughts on like, will there be, live shows online? Like how, like what, because I mean, at a certain point, like it's so great to like put out free, a lot of people are doing like free live shows and this and that, but at a certain point it's like, no, you have to like also make an income. So I'm intrigued to see how that might change or transition, whether it's like really intimate venues and kind of going back to doing that where the ticket price is higher, or just shows online. I'm just wondering if that's something that, you've considered or thought about, or have a preference or something like that.
I mean, I've definitely thought about it, but yeah, like it's weird. The concept of a show and a bunch of people jamming into the space to watch live music seems so kind of like almost archaic and like, and like kind of like quaint. It seems quaint now. It's like, the good old day. It's like now the thought of that happening seems so absurd right now. I mean, I got to imagine it's going to at some point. I mean, people are social animals, and I think everybody wants to have those experiences. And that's a big part of life is experiencing things with large groups of people. But yeah, I mean, there may be some harsh realities on the horizon. And that's just that, luckily we're established as a band, and, I have the visual identity and all that stuff. So it's like, we're in a lucky, really fortunate spot. And I feel super, super fortunate to be in this position. But like, I feel like emerging artists right now, and when this comes back, it's going to be really difficult because a lot of the small venues are going to go away and a lot of the opportunities are going to go away. And I think that's going to be a huge kind of learning curve, the way that the entire industry adjusts, because it was already tough enough, to break into things these days without not being able to play shows, because that's kind of how a lot of artists get off the ground, is they just go on the road, grind for a few years.
Right. That's wild.
Yeah. When it comes to diversifying your income streams as an artist, like how has your guys' relationship with art and branded work and client work, how has that changed over the years, starting with you, Chris?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that in some capacity, social media has like played a role within that, just having the understanding from brands or brand perspectives that like when myself or somebody else gets a chance to speak to this massive audience, like nobody really knows that audience quite like us, and you get a chance to know their interests and digest what their needs are. And I think that the ability to sort of, in some capacity, collaborate more closely with certain brands is really amazing. For me, it's usually something where I'm shooting an assignment for somebody, and then there's, on top of that, there is an expectation to kind of like, or a part of the program to share it or to, expose it to the world in some capacity. So yeah, it's been fun. It kind of puts the creativity back into, I think, the artist's hands a little bit, which is really refreshing, as opposed to sort of trying to convince somebody behind a cubicle how the modern day consumer operates when you're the person that's interacting with them all the time. So that has been really fulfilling, at least for me, and something really rad to work on. And I would say in terms of like just recession proofing the business, I think that what I've realized, at least for me, is when things are going really well, a couple of years ago or whatever it is, when you're at the top of your whatever, it's so hard to take a step back in that moment and be like, oh my gosh, well, I want to utilize this time when things are good to like take a step back and maybe create assets or things that I could use for when times aren't great, and for me, a lot of that's been like making books, making films, things that can have trickle down income effects, making online workshops and whatnot, and just trying to rely upon that so that you can still serve this audience and not be having to, like, you know, for me, again, you know, travel around the world to do so or something like that. Yeah.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, I think I had a much more direct connection with brands, you know, in my graphic design career, but, you know, it was mostly doing like posters for like a ad campaign or like logos or something like that. In music, I've had a little less, you know, there aren't, you know, I think we've done like, you know, car commercials, but that's like, they're just licensing an existing song. It's not like you're making it custom, but like doing remixes. I just did a song for a video game, which was like, you know, kind of the closest analog to doing you know, to when I was doing client design work. And that was definitely, you know, those types of things. I think that was always something I looked at as the future anyways, is like maybe doing film scores and doing commercial music and stuff, just because, you know, the older you get, and as you get a family and all these things, you want to be home, and you just, you know, the reality of nonstop touring isn't as quite as appealing anymore. So, you know, those are kind of things that I always had in the back of my head. And I think in a way, this just kind of like forces you to like, be like, okay, you know, this is something you actually need to be actively pursuing if in fact it is something that you want to develop and be able to do later. But, you know, you hope that you create enough intellectual property and through the music and through whatever, you know, artwork you're doing, that, like Chris was saying, like over time, it kind of builds up a catalog where you can hopefully live off that.
We talked to Tony Hawk last week, and we were talking, you know, skateboarding was such a kind of nascent thing that when brands first approached him and he was very young, he was like, hell yeah, this is the way people are going to find out about skateboarding, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it really does have a power to spread an art form to the masses in a way, to work with a brand, and not just being, it's not just that your art is being used, you know, but you're using that platform as well.
Yeah, I think one of the first my kind of biggest breakthrough, I think early on, was Adult Swim used a bunch of my music from kind of like this is like 2006 for like the bumpers, and for like when Toonami went off the air, that they used like a song as like the final, they used Cascade as like the outro. And like, I feel like I still hear people who are like, oh, I heard about it through Adult Swim. So I always thought that was so rad. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I want to ask about something you just talked about nonstop touring and the sustainability of that. Because like, Chris, you're also like no stranger to van life.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you guys, how are your guys' touring lives different, and maybe how are they the same, and what would your advice be to artists or creators or people who have a craft who are facing that prospect of having to go out into the world in order to spread their message? Maybe we could start with you again, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because my career started as like one big road trip. And I don't mean that in like the romantic sense. I mean that in like the real physical sense. Like the very first trip I ever did, before I left the country, even before I had a passport, was I spent 50 days in a Volkswagen bus traveling up and down the coast of California, and, you know, living and breathing out of this 76 VW Vanagon with a friend of mine and documenting everything. We made a book called The California Surf Project that was published by Chronicle. And that trip was amazing. I mean, you get into such a rhythm being, at least for me, being on the road. This is one thing that's interesting, is like photography as a skill set is never going to become second nature if it's like something you casually do on a Monday and casually pick up on a Friday and whatnot. You know, it has to be an intrinsic part of you, and being able to wake up and like go to sleep, wake up and kind of eat and breathe the assignment. You become really connected to it. And I think that has been, for me, like every project I do that allows me to really be immersed in it, those are the kinds that I really look forward to. And although it can be a grind and it can be so painful and it can suck while you're in it, you really look forward to it. Like kind of going back and forth. Like for me, I'm one of those people where I tell my wife, and she knows, like when I'm on the road, I'd rather stay on the road for a period of time and then come home for a period of time. I don't want to do this like home for 2 days, gone for 5 days, because it's a different, it's a different mentality, and you get into a different place. And I think that for me, I usually have to really fill up this deep well of inspiration when I'm home. So when I go out on the road, I can really pull from that, spending time to make sure that I'm like satisfied and happy and, well fed and all those things, so that when I go out there, I can give 110% to whatever that assignment asks of me.
That's awesome. That sounds like an amazing trip. The California the surf
project
one.
It was sick, man. It was interesting. It definitely we got terrible poison oak and ate a lot of Mexican food, and it was amazing. But yeah, it was cool to see every coastal county and like kind of document that, and really kind of, I guess, like not rush, we're always rushing through, but yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever been up to Lost Coast?
Yeah, that area is rad. It's so cool and remote, and a lot of interesting people to put it lightly. But yeah, like it does feel like California, 1,000 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, my wife and I actually took a VW van and went out to it was like an abandoned, it's a closed state park, but you can still drive in. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And there was like elk walking in the waves, walking in the surf. It was the craziest. Seemed like it was a lot. It felt like a lost coast, literally.
Legitimately, like there are some parts of California that are so wild. You're just like, how in the world is this the same state as like LA, where it's like, it's a desert basically. And I don't know. Yeah, it's super funny. I actually like have a real soft spot for San Francisco and Northern California. Like I would rather drive to San Francisco and spend an extra hour driving just to fly out of there than to drive to LA, because I appreciate the experience of like being in the fog and being close to parks and knowing that like there's redwoods just around the corner, like I don't know. I feel like it's a gateway to just a lot of really awesome stuff.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Like, yeah, you realize, logically you're like, yes, I'm in a city, but like, especially if I live out in the Mission, kind of on the edge of it. So you're it's just a big neighborhood. Like right. I don't feel like when I go downtown or go to like Fisherman's Wharf or whatever, I'm like, this is a different place. Like you visit the city. So like out here, it feels pretty. And then you're connected to all these places. That's what I love about the city.
But it has like actual borders. Like LA, you can drive forever, and you're in LA. Like you're like, I'm 200 miles from and I'm still in LA. Like San Francisco is only like 7 square miles. Like you can get out of it quickly. It has actual perimeter. I mean, to me, that's like, that feels more approachable. Like you're like, hell, I could park my car and walk out of this damn thing if I needed to, LA, there's like no escaping LA.
Yeah. Do you ever get energy from being on the road as an introvert, or is it just a resource draw?
It's something I had to really get kind of like, get accustomed to and build up like I learned to enjoy it after a while. I basically learned to enjoy performing live, because that used to be like this very difficult experience for me that I had to like really get all worked up over. And, it left me rattled, and, slowly you get desensitized to that just from repetition. But I finally, in the last 2 years, got to a point where I kind of broke through, and it was truly something I think I drew energy from. So that keeps you going for the next day, because you're like, only 8 hours till I get to go do that again or whatever. So there's that part. And I mean, I think the regimentedness, part of it, like waking up at the same time, going to sleep at the same time, knowing you have to be in this certain place and do this certain thing at the same time every day, having these meals kind of planned out, and you're with the same people. There's something kind of like meditative about that for me. Instead of when I get home, it's like, what should I be doing? You're always having to make all these decisions. And when you're on the road, it's just like autopilot until you get on stage. And then it's like an hour and a half of this super intense emotional thing. And then it's right back to like military regimen. So that part of it is cool. I think recently I've gotten a lot more used to it, and I'm drawing energy from it instead of just giving tons of it away,
Right.
Was it just
that's a funny thing to say, like pulling energy from it as opposed to just letting it tap you, because there is something so true about that. I mean, I get lucky enough to like speak a lot on at conferences and whatnot. And if you can let it be one of those two things, you can let it be totally like sap you of everything you have and like exhaustive, or you can get like super fired up. I think the crowd, the audience has so much to do with that, you know? And like,
yeah,
I hate the word energy more than anything else, but to say that, like the energy they're putting off, you know, and if makes a huge difference. So
yeah,
yeah,
definitely. That's like, I've done very few, but back in my design days, I used to do some speaking, but I was so bad at it. I was like, I can't do this anymore. But that was definitely like sap. That was definitely the other way. I was pushing pure, and then I was like wiped out for 2 days, you know? Yeah. I always felt like I just barely got by or something. But like, yeah, I feel like I think I just never prepared enough. I feel like the more I prepare and the more I understand what's the intention of the whole thing, like why am I going up there? What am I trying to tell the audience? What story am I trying to tell, whether it's with music or speaking or whatever? Once I have a clear picture of that, then I feel like, oh, I'm up here doing this, you know, I'm doing this thing I want to be doing, instead of like, how do I just get through this? Which is how I think I mistakenly looked at a lot of performances, just being in front of people for a long time, because it just didn't come naturally to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think well, first I'd like to know if there are elements of your profession, Chris, that make you nervous sometimes, where the stage fright comes in or something.
Not as much now. I think early in the beginning of my career, there was a lot of like imposter syndrome. And then nowadays there's still a bit of like fear. If I'm shooting something that I'm not super proficient at, you know, if I'm hanging off a cliff, shooting, climbing, in Yosemite, or if I'm, you know, swimming in the water and there's big creatures somewhere around there. I mean, there's elements to it that keep me like on my toes, but not like the situation where I'm like, where I feel ill prepared, you know. I feel like getting the job done is usually a matter of the right conditions lining up. And I think that you get to a healthy place with creativity where you realize like you can't control everything. And a part of these things, you know, after you've had jobs, you know, like where you've been on beaches where like there's a huge crew and everybody's trying to make something happen and like the weather just isn't cooperating. There's times where you just want to push through and force it and make it happen, but it's like you can't. And I think that accepting the fact that nobody's going to blame you for that is a part of just growing up and getting a little older and more mature. And because in the beginning of my career, I'd be like, oh, this is it. Like, you know, nobody's going to forget this, you know, and it just is what it is. So I think that, but once you put in those 10,000 hours, you know, the camera becomes an extension of you, and you don't like fear the creative process anymore. All I fear is like inclement weather and those things. You know, I don't get so afraid of like not being able to accomplish the assignment.
I think it's safe to say you guys both derive a lot of inspiration from the natural world. Chris, obviously, for you. Scott, I wonder a little bit more on your end. Where does some of the natural imagery come from? You live in a city. You grew up in Sacramento. Like, what's your relationship like with nature?
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually grew up outside of Sacramento, up in kind of a more rural area, especially back then in the early 80s. Is a very rural area, like right on the American River. So like, yeah, we just spent our time creeping around in the woods and swimming in the river, and that was the backdrop, and that's kind of how I feel like that's what I've always been speaking to, is kind of that connection. And then when I came out here, it was the ocean and you know, a lot of the music since, I feel like I can hear that influence in it. But obviously, you know, it's like you can put that meaning into it, or you can be drawing inspiration from that. It doesn't necessarily mean other people are going to pick up on that. But I do hear people say, they're like, oh, this makes me think of, you know, the ocean, or this makes me think of driving down, you know, the one, or something like that. So I guess it makes its way through. But, you know, with my design work, I was definitely speaking to that in a more literal way as well. And all my like kind of landscape photography stuff.
I definitely feel that. I definitely feel like there's a, I don't know how to put this, but there's like a something synonymous with California in a lot of the music, at least, you know, like it just tends to, I don't know, naturally gravitate to like helping collect a memory, you know? Yeah, I don't know. It's synonymous with it for me.
I'm reading some of the comments here. people want to know, Chris, how do you pick your locations?
Yeah, I mean, planning is like a huge joy of mine. Like I actually enjoy, just as much as I enjoy like building out a really interesting like bike ride, I enjoy like looking on Google Earth for like undisclosed or unnamed islands off the coast of Alaska or Russia or wherever. And it's like a challenge. It's like a fun challenge. Like, oh, can you get there? Like, how do you get there? How would you access that? Who do you have to hire? Who do you have to pay? Who do you have to beg, to give you access? So, I mean, a big part of it is coming from this background of shooting surfing for magazines, where my job was really to like highlight these off the beaten path waves. I think I've really tried to input that into like other landscape photography work or commercial work for brands, where I'm kind of bringing them to new and or different locations that maybe haven't been seen or haven't been photographed that much. And again, I'm never really the first person to ever go to these places, but we're usually trying to bring a project or a story there that maybe hasn't been told. So that's a big part of it, and again, it starts with social media. You browse the internet, you look on blogs, you look on write-ups, you look on some Russian Flickr site, who knows? But yeah, Google Earth is a great tool for that too.
That's crazy. You're actually doing like flyovers in Google Earth and being like, what's that island?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like, oh man, this island, because you look down on Google Earth, and if you're looking for surf, sometimes it's pretty easy. You look for like white water lines off of like a point of land, and you're like, that could be a point break, or that could be a beach break. There's no rocks. You can kind of see like the texture of the beach. And we've found so many ways doing that. And a lot of times you're kind of going somewhere that there is surf there, or there's waves there. Or again, like, for me, I shoot a lot of action sports, or I shoot a lot of outdoor sports. Like, oh, there's a climbing area there. And then you're just kind of like poking around, looking at other things, seeing like, well, okay, you could camp here and there's fresh water there. And somebody could get you in on a Zodiac here. So if you could boat to the island, like, those types of scenarios, and I don't know, that there's something to that. Like when you do get to that place and you find that location and it is maybe what you dreamed of, it's pretty much like, I don't know, finding a pot of gold at the other end of the rainbow for me.
How many of those places do you feel like you have this cache of places that only you and a few other people know about?
Definitely. There's a couple places where like, I feel like I'm one of the very few people who ever been lucky enough to experience it, or experience it as good as it gets, like, cause some places people have been to, but maybe they went during the wrong season, or they didn't do it in the right way. So they kind of got skunked. Right. And yeah, there's a handful, and there's definitely like a laundry list of spots where I would kill to go to, but it's always a matter of budget and timing and like trying to convince somebody to go there. The Kerguelen Islands that are like French owned islands, and you need to be a scientist to get there. And, they do one expedition a year, but it's like, it has animal life that like is only seen in one place on Earth. I don't know. There's stuff like that. That's just like this laundry list of like dream locations. But what I always find is like the more time you put into going there, I think the more likely it is to happen. Like for me, I've been to Iceland 41 times. When I first started going, it was very unknown, but obviously it became very popular, and now it's super accessible. But like what's kept me going back is like the time and energy I've placed into understanding that location and its moods and its weather and all these things has paid off tenfold and allowed me to go back over and over for different projects and whatnot.
How much have you like I'm sure you've seen it change a ton. Like, and do you think social media is what kind of popularized Iceland? I mean, that's kind of how it got on my radar.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. But the beauty of it is it's so funny. Like it's like anywhere else, what's really impacted is this 6-hour stretch of coast where everybody goes. But if you literally veer, you go beyond that, or you go to the interior, you go to the West Fjords, the East Fjords, there are mysteries waiting to be discovered. And if you go, hike 10 miles down any trail, you'll be led to somewhere that like is completely empty. So it's a funny one because again, it's like 1% of the location is really accessed, and there's so much like, hidden hot springs and just amazing little places all throughout. But I feel like it's always been my relationship with the local people in those places that's paid off the most. Like they're the ones kind of discovering or sharing some of these like gems that I would have never known about personally, or could have never found myself, you know?
That's awesome. I got to get there. We've been talking about it forever, but it just still hasn't happened.
Yeah. If you ever go, I'd be psyched to get you some intel. There's this crazy story.
That'd be awesome.
Actually, there's a stretch of the coast. It's really wild. There's a stretch of this coast in Iceland called the West Fjords, and there's a national park. It's like the most remote corner of the country. And randomly, there's a beach where a lot of wood collects. And so there's these homes people used to live in year round. Now they're summer homes where they build these beautiful houses because they have wood from like Nova Scotia. Anyway, I went there on a boat from Isafjordur. It's actually like a little overnight crossing, or you can take a speedboat out there. And they have this insane hot spring in this little village community. And I go there and I'm sitting there. And, you know, the people come up and they start chatting. Obviously, they're stoked that we're there. And this old guy, he comes up and he's like, oh, you got to come to my house. I want to make some coffee. I want to show you some photos. And I start flipping through his photo album with him. And I'm like, I recognize that dude. And I'm like, why is there like a blonde supermodel in this hot spring? And he's like, whoa, that's Mick Jagger came here. And this is who he brought with him. And oddly enough, and so this is like the legend of the lore, so to say. This place has become a place that many musicians, Icelandic or otherwise, pay homage to the fact that like there's this remote bay, there's this remote community with an incredible hot spring. And Mick Jagger went there because he wanted just to go like see the most isolated part of the country. And that was one of the most isolated parts of the country. And so like, obviously like Monsters of Men and Bjork and all these people have been there and other bands. So it's kind of a funny one. Just talking about like, you know, you going there, I'm like, if you go, you should really, you should really check.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
It's pretty.
That sounds amazing.
It was a weird tale. I was like tripping out. I have the photos of his album. It was wild.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Wow. Iceland sounds incredible.
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys about the tools you use. You know, obviously the easiest way to answer would be, you know, what are your favorite tools? Well, my camera, my computer. But getting a little bit more specific than that, like either currently or historically, what do you say are some of the most important tools that you could maybe recommend to others who are pursuing the types of creative stuff you guys are pursuing? Scott, would you like to start?
I mean, I don't know if you can see, this is kind of my axe, the Mini Moog. This is kind of like my go-to synth. These two actually. So these are like my favorite synths of all time, a Korg Monopoly and a Mini Moog. These are like early 80s, mid 70s synths. But yeah, beyond that, I think, you know, the computer is obviously an easy answer, but Reaper, the DAW that I use is kind of like, it's the multi-tracker. It's like the tape machine.
You're a Reaper user.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like, that's like my whole process is built around Reaper and only, it's the only one that ever kind of fit into the skeleton key of the way that I go about things. So that really enabled me. Like I switched, I think like 11 years ago from Sonar and yeah, that's become like my main tool. And I think it allows me to do a lot of the stuff that I do.
Awesome.
You just said some stuff that I have like, it's so over my head. It was awesome.
Well, maybe
it's
now
like
it's your turn.
It's Lightroom. Reaper is the Lightroom of music.
Epic. That's exactly what I needed to know. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's hard because I think that like, you know, intrinsically we think of like the camera, that's the tool, right? That's the tool. But more and more, I guess I've tried to transition in any way that I can from being a photographer, you know, to using my vision to like work on films and write books and things like that. And just, I think using my voice in general and using it as a form of storytelling. So I'd say if you stripped away all that technology for me, for my craft and all that bullshit, like all I would really care about is having stories worth telling and learning how to, I think, deliver them in a way that feels compelling and feels visceral and, you know, and inspires change, because I think that's why I try to create images or films is to inspire change within people. So I think like at the very core of who I am, I would say that having a strong vision for what you want to say or the story you want to tell, that's really what I aim for. That's what I seek out. So I think, yeah, that's maybe the one tool in my toolkit that I try to keep the sharpest. It's a lot of times why I take speaking assignments that I'm scared out of my mind to do, because I know it'll keep me kind of, it'll keep me sharp, and I really learned that from like studying the work of Ansel Adams and the advocacy work that he did with, for the government and for Sierra Club and whatnot.
It's really interesting that you mentioned vision, right? Because I was thinking about like, there are some great blind photographers, right?
Yeah.
Folks like, I'm thinking of a woman named Alice Wingwall, who is the wife of one of the architects who founded Sea Ranch.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And she's like in her 80s now. Wonderful woman. And when you ask her about, the camera or whatever, she knows how to work a camera. She understands all that stuff. But that's not how she shoots. It's about understanding what she's shooting and interacting with what she's shooting before she sets up the camera. And similarly, even when you talk about music software, there's a lot of music software that's not yet accessible for blind people because of software engineering. Luckily, Reaper is getting there. But you can obviously still have wonderful musicians who are blind. So it's not even so much always about the tool. Sometimes the tool is irrelevant or maybe not even necessary at all, right?
I think I'm kind of the opposite way. I've always thought of my product is the process that I design, and the input is something that I can conceive of, but the output is something I never could have conceived of on my own. So I think of designing a system almost like software. I think of the studio as a system, and I can operate it because I understand it, but I can't conceive of what's going to come out the other side. And I think that's kind of what I'm always going for, is creating something that I wouldn't have thought on my own, because if I thought of it on my own, it probably isn't that great. You need some interstitial element to kind of like, you need all these permutations, and then you're like, whoa, what's that one? And you follow that one, and then it changes, and you follow it down until you arrive in this destination that you never could have thought of, So that's, I would love to be more inspirational, where I could sit down and play an acoustic guitar and sing and just create this beautiful masterpiece, but that's just never really, I've always needed technology. Technology is kind of my voice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think, but switching up the tools can create different creative products, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I'm always trying to like create variety and keep, have enough options to do, enough tools for every purpose that you never end up using one. Because I found myself falling into that, you fall into a mode of operation where you're like, oh, this is how I use this tool, or whatever, this synth or this guitar or this amp. And so like having a few keeps it fresh.
We know about blind musicians, but Chris, you know any blind photographers that you could tip us?
I personally don't know, but
there's some cool ones out there.
Yeah, no, that would be interesting to explore. I don't know. Maybe I have some sort of kinship with them, because I'm definitely colorblind.
Oh, really?
And grew up that way. Yeah, it's a funny one though, because being colorblind doesn't mean you can't see color. It just means you confuse color really easily, right? So greens and browns and blues and purples, like when certain things are close to each other, all my life I could just never identify them. And it's funny because it definitely interprets the way I edit things in Lightroom and where I try to bring an image back to. A lot of it's just bringing it back to what I saw, and how it interpreted itself to me. So yeah, no, it's a funny process. It's definitely interesting.
We actually have a lot of colorblind Be My Eyes users.
No way.
Who use the app to call a volunteer to match colors and whatnot sometimes.
Oh, wow. That's right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Cool.
I just ended up hiring someone to help me do that stuff because it was too hard.
Man. You can get someone to help you for free. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I wonder if let me just check out a few more questions here before we start to wrap up. What sort of new projects are coming up, guys? Are you breaking some new bounds? Are you hoping to try out some new things, Chris?
I have a film that's touring right now at film festivals, and sadly it would have been premiering at Tribeca, but that's not happening. So it's all getting pushed online or later in the year, which is fine. But yeah, it's a really cool film about fatherhood and risk and parenting, and raising a daughter in a complicated world. So I'm excited about that. And I just released a book on Iceland's glacial river systems and the effort to protect them against damming and aluminum smelters and things of that nature. So a lot of things in the works, and I'm just staying busy. And yeah, I'm always kind of looking for that next thing. I've got a couple other things up my sleeve. But again, it's, without knowing how travel will be affected, it's hard to know what'll happen with those. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's the name of the book? The Iceland book?
It's called At Glacier's End. Yeah.
At Glacier's End.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's cool.
What about you, Scott? What's in the pipeline?
I'm working on a couple collaboration projects. Did a song for a video game that'll be out pretty soon.
Right.
But I'm just working on another album that hopefully, now I got a jump start on it. I wasn't expecting to be able to start on it till this winter, so it's awesome to be able to kind of focus on that already this soon in the cycle.
We're gonna get a lot of new music in a few
months. That's awesome.
I think in general, yeah, I gotta imagine there's gonna be a tidal wave of music coming in about 2 months, like after just enough time for people to have finished all these songs, and then the labels get a hold of them, and the whole release schedule that's always like delayed by a few months. So at like month 5 or 6 of the lockdown, if it lasts that long, you're gonna see a lot of stuff coming out, I think.
So what happens when you trap creative people in a room for 3 months? Yeah.
Yeah, the stuff's gonna be weird too.
Yeah, seriously, especially from bands like I work alone most of the time, so it's like it's not that big of a deal. But like if you're like just like a normal rock band or something, I'm imagining people are having to find like creative solutions to how to write together.
I have a funny question. So the last time, the only time I ever was at Burning Man. Chris, I don't know. Have you ever been to Burning Man?
Haven't, no.
So
been to the desert a lot, but not Black Rock.
Let me tell you something about Burning Man. Scott is kind of a big deal at Burning Man, and everyone was like, sunrise set. Scott, why do you think the sunrise set that you do at Burning Man is so special to people?
I know why it's special to me is because Burning Man's a big part of at least a big segment of San Francisco culture. So when I moved here, that's every year that's all people were talking about, and all summer, and so like I was like I don't know about. It just aesthetically, it didn't really suit me from what I saw of it. What the image I had from it.
Doesn't seem like your scene.
I don't know how I cobbled that together. But then I got there after my neighbor finally convinced me, and I got there and I was like, oh, this is just an absolutely beautiful place. And like all the flamethrowers and like Victorian steampunk stuff that's an element of it. But the rest is just camping in the desert with a bunch of friends. And so, I'm like, okay, I could get this. But what really got me is that when you go out at night, they have these giant cars that are like mobile sound systems essentially. And it's the first time I had connected with electronic music since my days raving in the 90s, on these giant systems with a bunch of people. And the sound out there, it's like this really fine dust that's coating the ground. And like I wouldn't even call it sand because it's really dust. And it's like, it absorbs sound and scatters it in this really interesting way. And I've never heard music doesn't sound the same anywhere in the world as it does out there, especially at loud volumes, especially low frequency. So it just made me, I had kind of moved away from electronic music. And when I first went out there, I was like, it like reignited my love of it. And then on like the third day, he's like, oh, you got to go to this sunrise set. It was this guy named Scumfrog. He does these sunrise sets all the time out there. And I went to it and it just like blew my mind. Like the sun's rising. You're literally like on this, like the most incredible picture I could ever take. You're living in it, and it's like the greatest music, and it's like all these people in it. It just made me. I was like, whatever that is, I want to do that. I never even DJ'd until I saw that set, and then I was like, okay, I got to like figure out what DJing is, and someday come back here and do this. So yeah, it took a couple of years, and then I finally got back out there and started doing it.
Wow, that's great. That's an incredible story.
Yeah, it's one of the funnest, definitely one of the most enjoyable mornings of the year for me. It's so sad it's not going to happen this year. We'll have to try to do it online.
I don't know if it's a fair question, but Chris, what's your sunrise set?
You still there?
You still there? Can you hear me?
I just heard like static.
Oh, okay. We're not hearing you, bud. Well, maybe it's because it's 4 o'clock, and so we need to wrap it up anyway.
Computer died on me. Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, all good.
All right.
All good.
Yeah.
Chris, I was just wondering, I asked you, I don't know if you heard the whole thing about the sunrise set from Scott.
I did. I ended at the part where he's talking about it's not all about the steampunk and huge vehicles, and it's about, you know, camping in the friends of your desert. And I think I was smiling, and then it all passed out. But no, I feel like I can imagine. Yeah.
But he was just talking about how the sunrise set ignited his love for electronic music again, and how it's a really special moment for him out of every year to return to. I wonder, what's your sunrise set?
Oh, I mean, honestly, I think any sunrise in general. There's, you know, it's a funny one. I was talking to my wife about this, but like, I think sunrises are way, way more special than sunsets, just simply because of the fact that less people experience them and everything's more quiet. The world is not usually as ready or willing to wake up and be that, you know, even animals are like, you know, they're out more. There's just, to me, it's like, I've always considered like my favorite trip is the last trip I went on, because it's the one that's the most visceral. It's the one that's the most real. It's the one that's the most raw. And like, I try not to live too much in like, oh, that one thing, I want to shoot that one thing, that one moment. Because I think they're all special in their own way. And anytime that I can utilize a camera to document a place I love or something I fear losing, I feel really empowered and lucky. And, I don't know. I mean, I feel like every sunrise is pretty much a gift. So I'm trying to appreciate it more these days. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Do you get out oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, do you get out, Chris, like very early? Usually my manager's a big surfer, and he's got me out. He's got me out a few times, like where we actually were in the water and watched the sunrise. And I don't think I've ever felt anything quite like that.
It's
Montara Beach.
Yeah, dude, there's no better feeling than like when you see the sun like rise and hit the water. I definitely tend to, you know, have more evening sessions because I'm lazy like everybody else. Those moments when I get fired up and I'm like up at 5 and, you know, driving up the coast, like that's a rad feeling. And it's like, it's brisk offshore and it's chilly, and you get like, there is something so primal about that, you know, and raw. And I really love translating that to like having a camera or not, you know, it's just like, it's a really cool feeling. And I think that like it comes through in the creative process when you feel all those things, you know, and it feels new and different. So that's kind of, I appreciate that a lot more for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, we're at time, and I just want to thank you guys on behalf of Outpost, behalf of Be My Eyes. We're just like, what an awesome conversation, and thanks for taking the time out of your day to chat with us, and for everyone who's watching.
Dude, thank you guys. Scott, thanks for everything, man. Stoked to catch up.
Yeah. Thanks. Good meeting you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for tuning in.
You.
All right, y'all. Have a great rest of your day.